I'm Kakashi with Kanto Capital. So today we have something a little bit different and a little bit fun, I think. So here's the deal. I was a little bit concerned. I just had this gut feeling that something was wrong. I had this weird gut feeling that my Pokemon portfolio, was getting a little bit out of balance. So for example, if we look at something like stocks, I would keep a relative balance of different traits, safe versus speculative, let's say dividends versus a growth stock, domestic versus foreign is another example, etc., etc. So I just like to have that little bit of diversification. I was getting a little concerned because I just felt like my Pokemon portfolio might be getting a little bit lopsided. So I just randomly decided to do an audit because I was worried that I might actually need to rebalance. And as I started to look at the numbers and break things down, it surprised me quite a bit. And while I was doing that, I just randomly thought that this information might be really helpful for you too, because it seems like a lot of people that watch this channel, they have a little bit of a misconception about the items that I hold, because honestly, I don't really show you guys much of what I have. All right, really quick guys, before I reveal the results, leave a comment and give me your best guess on what you think is my largest Pokemon investing category. I'm not really going to explain what I mean by category because I want to leave the question a little bit open-ended so I don't really spoil the surprise of the results. But drop a comment and just give me your best guess what you think would be my largest position. I'm really curious to see what you guys would think it is. But anyway, I just think this will be especially helpful if you are a brand new collector and maybe you're not really sure how to get started, or maybe you just have no clue what people are buying, because I know that's a really big mystery for a lot of people. And not that I'm necessarily doing things the best way or the perfect way, but at least you have one perspective, especially if you are just brand new or just returning to the hobby. And of course, if you've been around for a while, here's just one more data point just to help you out on what someone else is doing. So anyway, the first thing to know is this is based on approximate current values of the items that I hold. So for example, if I were looking at a stock market portfolio, or if I was looking at, if you're calculating your net worth, for example, you would judge your portfolio based on its current market values, not on your cost basis. So obviously these numbers are very different after the big 2020 bull run. So this really changes the context of my holdings. And that was part of the reason that I was a little concerned to begin with, because I just felt like, again, my portfolio might have been a little out of balance. So let's start with sealed product. That is about 28% of my portfolio. So sealed product is pretty much everything that you would expect. So things like booster boxes, elite trainer boxes, loose packs, collection boxes, and I don't know what else, but anything sealed, for example, pretty much. And a very interesting thing to note about the sealed product is I bought all of it thinking that the prices really wouldn't move at all for at least maybe 2 to 3 years. At the bare minimum, that was my bare minimum expectation, was that it would take at least 2 to 3 years for the prices to start to go up. But because we went into this crazy bull run of 2020, it turns out that pretty much everything went up in terms of my sealed product. I don't know if there's anything that didn't increase in value. I think everything that I have pretty much that I could think of off the top of my head, I think everything went up in value. So it really performed well above my expectations, and that's part of the reason it's a little bit higher than I would have guessed at 28%. So that's sealed product. Next up is vintage. So I'm talking about vintage single cards. So for vintage, that's currently about 22% of my position. Now vintage is a little interesting because it spiked really hard this year, and it also retraced the hardest. But in the end, it still moved up very big in terms of my net gains from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. Now my vintage position is a little bit different because even though it's 22% after the big move up in price, there's a couple of factors. First, I haven't been adding as much to this position as I'd like. Obviously with the prices so high right now, I'm not as keen to add at these levels. I might be looking at some things now, but at the peak of the bull run, obviously, I kind of had ceased most of my buying in vintage. I also have a ton of raw cards. So in theory, after sending a lot of cards into grade, this could become a much bigger number. So the 22% could really start to go up much larger, but obviously that's dependent on the grades that I get, and I try not to think about those potential grades too much until I actually know what it is. So when it's in its current form, some of it's graded, I have a lot of raw cards. Vintage is currently about 22% of my position. Next part of my portfolio is limited cards. So this is just the way I call it. Some of you guys would know these kind of as trophy cards, but this is really a little bit more of a broad category. They're really just non-set cards that are usually won in some way. So think of it as maybe it's a prize, or maybe you get it for being in some type of competition. So these items are pretty niche, but I know there's at least a few of you guys that are regular viewers of this channel who are really big fans of these type of cards. And this is a whopping 8.5% of my Pokemon position. So yes, it's actually quite small position size. Now, much like my vintage position, most of these cards are ungraded. So obviously if I graded these cards, the value would possibly jump up very fast and turn into a much bigger piece of my portfolio. But as of now, it's about 8.5%. So this is what I call my home run position. There's no, at least I don't know anyone else that uses this terminology, but this is just the way I see it, is I consider these limited cards a home run position. And basically, I'm thinking, I'm swinging for the fences on these. If these cards ever catch on and they become popular, if people start moving from set cards or graduating from those levels, and they start looking at cards that people win or prize cards, something with a little more interesting of a story, then these cards could really skyrocket up to extreme prices. But if they don't, then they probably will kind of wallow a little bit and not really move nearly as fast in turn, like compared to, let's say, something more popular like Hidden Fates or Base Set, which would probably be some of the cards that you would expect to move first, versus these cards, if they become popular, you could easily see very oversized gains, and so that's why I consider it my home run position. All right, moving on. Next part of my Pokemon portfolio is at about 10.5%. It's a little bit bigger than that, but it's about 10.5%, and that is modern singles. So yes, modern cards. So this is a very modest, again, about 10.5%. So it's quite small, especially when you consider how expensive modern cards are pretty much right upon release. We were seeing prices just coming really expensive right out the gate. For example, the Rainbow Fat Pikachu, for example, is just really expensive from day one, or the Charizards from Champion's Path, for example, really expensive first day. So I'm sitting on a good amount of ungraded cards in terms of modern. I also don't think I'm going to be sending this in for quite a while, at least maybe for the next year or two, maybe before I really start sending any cards in. Because again, we are still in the middle of this bull run, and I just kind of want to see where things settle. Obviously, I know there's huge delays at PSA, and even the new players like CGC are starting to get backed up as well. So I'm not in a big rush to grade these cards. So right now, modern singles is a little bit above 10.5%. So we have sealed, vintage, limited cards, and modern singles that I had covered so far. So my final position, in an upset victory, at least in my mind it was an upset victory, my final Pokemon portfolio position, and the largest one, is promo cards, and it's sitting at a very healthy about 30.5% of my Pokemon portfolio. So I would say this category of promo cards, it's virtually almost entirely made up of Japanese promo cards. There are some English cards in this, but not a lot. So this position has quite a bunch of unique elements to it that kind of gives it a little bit of a different story in terms of my portfolio. Once again, here is another position that I did not expect for these cards to go up in value for quite a long time. Of course, I would expect some of these cards to go up a little bit, but I really didn't expect them to make the moves that they did. But of course, again, 2020 happened, and these cards had a very solid increase. It didn't move as fast or as high as some of my other cards, for example, vintage, but in the end they did well enough to become my largest position size. On top of that, like many of my other cards that are singles, I have quite a bit of ungraded cards that could really bring this percentage much higher as well, so it could really elevate this number once I start sending these cards into grade. Again, I'm probably not going to do that for a while. But anyway, so in its current form, maybe some graded, some are a lot raw. Sitting about 30.5% is Pokemon promo cards in first place for my portfolio. So looking at everything as a whole, obviously some positions, just keep in mind they do cross over into other categories. So for example, there are limited cards that I have that are vintage. There are promo cards that can be considered modern, or not considered, they are modern. There's promo cards that are modern, for example. There's promo cards that are vintage. So this isn't a perfect snapshot, but this is just how I view my holdings and kind of how I categorize them in terms of my own investments and my portfolio. And after seeing the breakdown, I'm actually overall really happy with the numbers. It wasn't as out of balance as I expected it to be. I would somewhat like to make some adjustments, but it's not really as big of a deal as I thought it would be. I'm probably not going to rebalance at all. Maybe I'll just refocus my buying like I have done in the past. And I really didn't expect promo cards to end up being my largest holding. That actually completely surprised me. I did not see that coming whatsoever. I thought sealed would end up being my largest position. And even though my prize cards position is very small at around 8.5%, again, it's mostly ungraded. So I'm actually really happy with that position overall. It's maybe even a little bit too big of a position, again, because I'm considering it maybe a little bit more of a home run position. And so that might be my most controversial statement I make, because I know, again, some of you guys are not going to care about these types of cards at all. And then there's other people that are probably watching this that has huge bets on these types of cards, prize cards. So think, again, trophy cards, for example. Also, if you notice, my overall portfolio is actually quite safe. And I think that's going to surprise some of you. Obviously, I know this already, just the way I do things and how I like to purchase things. But actually, a bulk of my portfolio, I consider it to be very safe. I would bunch together my promos, my vintage card, and my sealed cards, and I would consider those all very safe items. And if you add those numbers up together, we're at about 89% of my portfolio. And I think, again, that might surprise some of you, but in my opinion, I think I have what I think would be a very conservative portfolio. I know some people might disagree in terms of the sealed product I have, especially since a lot of it is modern. And I know some people are big fans of sealed product, and some people say it should only be vintage sealed. But for me, I consider that a fairly safe position to have. So anyway, I just thought this would be a fun little thing to do, and it would also offer you a little bit more insight into my personal journey in Pokemon. I'm hoping that in some way it might spark some ideas for you, maybe on directions you can go with your collection or your personal goals, and maybe you'll find something that sounds a little bit interesting to you. So for example, maybe you don't really buy Japanese promo cards, or maybe you've never looked at prize cards before in the past. But while I was doing my audit, I just thought it would be interesting to share with you again, and sometimes it's those little weird details that no one talks about, and this is something that I know a lot of collectors wouldn't even have something like this available to them. So I just thought it would be something that would be really helpful, especially when it's those little details that not many people are going to talk about. So anyway, what do you guys think about my positions? Do you think I should make some adjustments? Did the results surprise you? Do you think I need to dump some of my sealed product? Do you think I need to invest more into trophy cards? Let me know what you think. Let me know your thoughts and your reaction to all this. And of course, remember to like and subscribe. Help me out with that YouTube algorithm, of course. I'm KAKASHI with Kanto Capital. Thank you as always for watching. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video.